This is seriously beyond ridiculous. It's ridiculous to the extreme. A Pakistani truck owner wanted to haul more cargo, so he brought his scrapped truck to Peshawar, planning to have the mechanics turn it into a heavy haul beast. To carry massive loads, the chassis frame is crucial. So, the mechanics first had to completely dismantle the frame for inspection. After taking it apart, every steel channel was badly rusted. It was still usable, but not durable. As the saying goes, you have to spend money to make money. So the owner decided to replace all the steel channels with new ones. And these new steel channels were made by the mechanics using thick steel plates, slowly pressing them into shape with a hydraulic press. Before that, they had already marked the steel plates with precise guidelines. Now they just needed to press along the markings. After one round of pressing, the steel had already taken on the shape of a channel beam, but it still wasn't finished. The bending angles still weren't precise enough. So now, the mechanics had to use a 90-degree mold to refine the corners, checking and adjusting them repeatedly, until every angle matched perfectly. This was an extremely time-consuming process. The mechanics worked from daytime straight into the night, just to produce enough pieces. But even then, they had no plans to stop working. They stacked one steel channel inside another, so the truck could haul 100 tons without deforming. With the tremendous force of the hydraulic press, the mechanics quickly managed to combine 3 channel beams into one to prevent the beams from shifting. During the next stages of work, the mechanics first pressed the 3 beams tightly together, then tack welded them into place. The next morning, the mechanics used grinders to smooth out the weld points. But even after grinding them smooth, they still felt that 3 layers of channel beams weren't strong enough, so they added a 4th layer at the rear. As a result, each side of the frame rail ended up with 4 layers. Isn't that a little excessive? The next step was even crazier. When installing the cross members, they didn't use any fancy alignment equipment at all. Instead, they simply relied on a tape measure for basic measurements. The most advanced tool they used was basically a water level bottle. Even so, the mechanics still managed to ensure that the frame had no alignment issues at all. Of course, if anything goes wrong, it becomes someone else's problem. After reinstalling the cross members, they first tack welded everything into place. Once all the cross members were installed, the truck frame finally took shape, but the work still wasn't finished. The mechanics still needed to use drills to make holes for installing rivets later. Although it wasn't as fast or convenient as a magnetic drill, their lever-assisted drilling method was still quite efficient. It saved both time and effort. Before long, they had drilled every hole needed for the rivets. Next came the mushroom head rivets, which were fixed in place using hot riveting. From the markings on the frame rails, we can clearly see that the rivet holes weren't drilled randomly. They were carefully marked out using precise geometry, then drilled point by point. Other holes for bolt-mounted components required the parts to be positioned first, then drilled according to the mounting holes. And there were quite a lot of them. Cab mounts, engine mounts, hanger brackets, and many more. Just drilling the holes and installing all those small components took an entire day. Once everything was installed properly, they could reinstall the leaf springs. Even though these were only the front leaf springs, the number of steel leaves was astonishing. Comfort clearly wasn't part of the plan. You'd probably shake non-stop while driving. To help reduce costs for the owner, the mechanics still chose to keep the original engine. What considerate mechanics. Still, doesn't this feel like a tiny horse pulling a giant wagon? Once the engine was securely mounted and the cab brackets were fully installed, they could lift the cab and move it into place for installation. Everything progressed incredibly smoothly. Every bolt hole lined up perfectly, with flawless alignment. Because of that, in less than an hour, the cab was fully secured in place. Meanwhile, another mechanic had already started measuring the position for the rear hanger brackets. Then they placed the brackets in the marked spots and tack welded them temporarily into place. After confirming the position was correct, they drilled the mounting holes and later secured everything with bolts. But those holes were actually the easy part. The most critical piece was the center hanger bracket, since the balance beam would later be installed there. The section being cut by the mechanic was specifically prepared for mounting the balance beam. This part was far from easy. The dimensions had to be absolutely precise. Otherwise, the truck would make abnormal noises while driving later. After checking and confirming everything was correct, they secured the hanger bracket in place. Then came the installation of the balance beam. Once all of that was installed, they could reassemble the rear leaf spring packs. Since the rear axles hadn't been installed yet, mounting the spring packs was still relatively easy. After securing the spring packs, they reinstalled the 2 rear axles. For easier handling, the axles didn't yet have tires mounted, allowing the mechanics to work directly on the ground. If there was even a slight misalignment, they could adjust the position using a chain hoist. Once the alignment was correct, they secured everything using U-bolts. At this point, the mechanics on the other side had nearly finished assembling the front section. Only the cab windshield was left to install. Their windshield installation method was surprisingly simple. They first wrapped a rubber seal around the glass. After that, they threaded a rope through the groove in the rubber seal. Once everything was ready, they worked together to place the windshield into position. After confirming the alignment was correct, the mechanic inside pulled out the rope that had been threaded into the rubber seal earlier. This allowed the seal to lock into the cab frame, holding the glass firmly in place. Next, they reinstalled the exhaust pipe that they had custom made themselves. At this point, the truck's overall structure had finally taken shape. Even though the tires still weren't fully installed, just looking at the reinforced chassis made it obvious this was no ordinary truck. With a frame like this, pulling 100 tons later on would be no problem at all. Still, to make absolutely sure everything was safe, the mechanics still needed to road test the truck. Afterward, they would continue fine-tuning it step by step, only after confirming there were no issues whatsoever. Would they hand the truck back to the owner, allowing him to hit the road with peace of mind?